right, so you spend all this time online, you're talking to Christians, you're trying to open their eyes, you're trying to help free them because they're brainwashed, because they have the religion of their oppressor. They worship a white man in the sky. Their faith has been changed over the years, and you're just trying to really just school them, right? And most Christians are not very receptive to that. You have some that will even debate with you or argue with you, right? Now, the reason why that is you don't know how to disprove the Bible. You don't know how to disprove Christianity. This is what you have to do, and I'll give you an example. I'm going to start with the Council of Nicaea. If you want to prove that the Council of Nicaea corrupted Christianity, or created Christianity, or created Jesus, or created the idea that Jesus was a God, if you want to prove that, you have to do more than just state it. You have to go to the documents that were produced by the people that were actually at the Council of Nicaea, and show and just read what the documents say about what happened. What was the topic of the Council of Nicaea and what happened? That's how you prove it. That's solid proof. Because even if you're right in what you claim, without any evidence, a person who doesn't share your view is not going to just agree with you because you say something. And evidence is not, well, I'm going to refer you to my man over here who's going to say the same thing as me. That's not evidence. That's just someone else affirming your claim. I'm going to show you a YouTube video of a guy just simply saying the same things. That's not evidence. That's just someone else saying what you said. That's not evidence. That's someone else making the same claim. Evidence is, look, in this book written by Constantine, Irenaeus, whoever else was there, in this book written by this person that was actually at the Council of Nicaea, this is what they wrote. These were the decrees. You know what I mean? So, like with something like Christmas, that's actually very easy. Now, Christmas wasn't. I'm not sure if that was from the Council of Nicaea or not. But something like Christmas, that's what y'all would do. Y'all will go. You'll tell a story. You'll bring up references to Saint Nick or something like that. Like that's a very easy thing. But when it comes to like the Council of Nicaea or different things about the Bible, y'all don't do that. So most Christians actually know about Christmas, the whole concept of Christmas. The concept of celebrating a pagan holiday is actually dealt with in the Bible already. And I believe Corinthians and Romans. Definitely in Romans. That kind of thing, pagan practices and how a Christian should deal with pagan practices, that was actually already dealt with. So, it doesn't, for many Christians, that's not a relevant issue because the Bible already, a lot of stuff y'all bring up, the Bible already deals with, and y'all don't know it. The division between the churches or the different denominations and things like the Bible talked about all of that stuff. And you don't know it. So you bring it up to a Christian like, y'all all divided. If it's true, why y'all have all this division? And you don't realize that the Bible already talked about that kind of thing. We expect to see it because it happened back then. And it explains why it happens. So it just bounces off of us. And you think we're just being blind or ignorant or whatever. No, it's just that we just kind of already know why it's like that. When it comes to the Council of Nicaea, you have to produce documents from the people who were there. And then not only that, if you want to prove that Jesus was not considered a god before the Council of Nicaea, if you want to prove that he wasn't worshipped, if you want to prove that he didn't exist or anything before the Council of Nicaea, not only do you have to deal with documents documents from the Council of Nicaea, you have to deal with documents before the Council of Nicaea that Jesus' name is mentioned. So he obviously existed before the Council of Nicaea. The early church fathers before the Council of Nicaea, some of them over 100 years, 200 years before the Council of Nicaea, they're preaching and they're quoting the Bible. So the Bible obviously existed, or at least those parts of the Bible obviously already existed. Like, you have to deal with the documents from Nicaea. Then you have to refute the early church fathers who talked about Jesus before the Council of Nicaea. You can't say that the Council of Nicaea started this, and then there are documents that prove otherwise, and then ignore those documents. Because when you talk to the Christian and you say anything about the Council of Nicaea starting anything, the first thing, if they're knowledgeable, the first thing to pop into their head is Polycarp, Justin Martyr, any of the other early church fathers who actually quoted certain things about Jesus. So It's just going to bounce off of them. And it's not that they're being ignorant. You're not dealing with the evidence that is there. If you want to prove the Bible is false, deal with the evidence that is there. You have to show that those early church fathers, the quotes from those early church fathers, either were fabricated or they were not from that time. They were after the Council of Nicaea. You can't just ignore them. They're out there, and I'll bring them up to people, and they just ignore what I just said, and kind of just go off into a tangent about how I don't want to listen. Deal with it. Like if you actually desire to teach someone, if you really think that Christianity and the Bible is that bad, do your due diligence and really break it down to somebody. Don't just make claims, right? Not only do you have to deal with the documents from the Council of Nicaea, because there are some documents, and you can find them online. Not only do you have to deal with quotes from the early church fathers, you have to deal with the fact that they were even able to have a council of church leaders implies that the church already existed, because you have church leaders meeting for the Council of Nicaea. So the church already existed. So if the church already existed and Jesus wasn't the Son of God and Jesus wasn't God in the flesh, if Jesus was not a real person, you have to show what the church did before the Council of Nicaea introduced all these things. That's how you break it down. That's how you prove that Jesus and all of that stuff is false. That's how you prove it. Now, when it comes to the Bible, and then also the whole thing, then we have a biblical timeline of when the books were written. Even like any respected scholar who actually studies ancient historical manuscripts and those sort of things, they will give you the latest date for the last book of the Bible that was written. Maybe, and this is super really generous. That would say like at least like the year 120, right? Now that's very late, because they were written much earlier than that. But like, let's just say like the worst case scenario, a respected person will say that the book of Revelation was written like maybe the year 120. That's still 200 years before the Council of Nicaea. So you have to deal with the scriptures that existed before the Council of Nicaea. Where did the scriptures come from? If they made all this stuff up about Jesus, but there's scriptures that existed before the Council of Nicaea that talk about Jesus, you got to deal with those. Prove them wrong. Prove that they were forgeries. Prove that they actually were not before the year 120. Prove that they came about after the Council of Nicaea, whatever. But you have to have an argument that accounts for them. Because again, when you talk about the white man did this or that or whatever, like those scriptures, the biblical scriptures existed centuries before England existed. Those scriptures existed centuries before Spain, Portugal, Germany, before America even existed. Those scriptures existed. You know what I mean? So it was like, you think that you making some kind of statement by making claims, but there's an actual history behind all of this stuff. Some of y'all don't even know that the Bible isn't just one big book. It's 66 books that were written over thousands of years by different people. Now, in terms of Jesus and the nature of Jesus, and the whole idea of Christianity changing and the early Christians didn't believe this about Jesus or whatever, then again, you got to go with the scriptures. You have to show how the scriptures were a forgery, because the scriptures, you have to show how the scriptures changed from what we have now to then. Because our claim is that the scriptures are exactly what they say, what they said back then about Jesus. And you're saying, no, Christianity was changed, it's been faked and whatever, it stole from other religions. Well, we're telling you that, these documents, and scholars are telling you these documents date back to this date or this year or whatever. You have to disprove that. If you really want to disprove the Bible, disprove those dates. Not just make claims. Not only that, the Bible, the gospel writers, they tell you why they wrote what they wrote about Jesus. You know what I mean? So it's like in Matthew, Jesus is born. They give the whole birth narrative of Jesus, and they say, this is to fulfill what Isaiah said. Thus a child will be born to us. A child will be born of a virgin or a maiden, and his name will be Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, Mighty God. Like, he says, this is why I'm writing this, because I saw this happen, and this is a fulfillment of an earlier prophecy. If you want to show that the Bible, the gospel writers stole from another religion, well, I gotta say this first. Like the whole Horus, Mithras, Attis, and all of that. If you want to show that the gospel writers stole from one of these other gods from a different culture, first thing you have to do is you have to prove that there is a correlation between the two. Like this, you have to actually prove the similarities. There are memes out there. There's like a million memes out there. There's articles, there's websites, all of this stuff, and they claim that Horus and Jesus is the same. For example, and I'll use him as an example since he's an Egyptian god, right? You have to prove that there is a similarity. You can't just say Horus had 12 disciples, Jesus had 12 disciples. Horus is born of a virgin. You're just making claims. That's not evidence. And the thing about Horus is actually written down in Scripture. So you can go to the Book of the Dead and actually show. If you want to prove that Jesus and Horus is the same, go to the Book of the Dead, screenshot it, post it, quote it, whatever, and just show the story of Horus. And people will see that they were either just like Jesus, the story of Jesus, or they're not. Now, assuming you can prove that there are similarities in their story, with proof, not just statements, not just by videos of someone saying the same thing. The actual scriptures. Now, I know in some things, maybe in some, like Mithra was like a secret religion, so it may be difficult to find scriptures. But Horus, you literally have him right there in the Book of the Dead. Y'all tell us. Y'all be telling us that's where Moses stole from. Y'all tell us that. Show us. Show me. That's how you prove it wrong. So the first thing you need to do is you need to prove that from the scriptures or from the Book of the Dead, in the case of Horus, you need to show that there is actually a correlation between Horus and Jesus and their narratives, right? The next thing you need to do is you need to prove that the gospel writers who lived thousands of years later and in an entirely different culture, you have to prove that they actually were aware of that story. Because the stories can be similar. It doesn't mean that one is fake or one is true. It doesn't mean that both is true or both is false or whatever, any kind of mixture. It just means that they're similar. You have to prove that those first century writers actually knew about it. And you have to take into account, you have to deal with their culture. Because the Jewish scriptures and the biblical writers were Jews, the gospel writers were Jews. You have their culture, their scriptures basically told them, you're special, you're better than everyone else, the other guy's worthless. So for people with that kind of national pride and that kind of religious pride in themselves and their God, you have to make the case of why a person who has that belief would actually steal from another God and make it theirs, like in a sense. Now, in the Old Testament, there's a whole lot of the Israelites stealing from the other gods and doing their practices. But they weren't telling a different story about their own God. They were indulging in the practices of the other people because the other religions allowed them to do stuff that their God wouldn't. So they would just kind of mix them in. Now, when you're talking about Jesus when you're talking about Jesus and Horus or Jesus and any other God, you're talking about the very nature of the God himself. So you have to show that, again, you have to show that they actually knew about this other story about Horus and that they actually drew from it. Not only do you have to show that, you have to break the chain of evidence that they provide. Like I said, they say this happened because Isaiah prophesied it. This happened because Jeremiah says it. This happened because Moses says it. You have to not only prove a connection to Horus, you have to disprove the connection that they make between their own earlier history, because they give you evidence for why they say what they say. And if you do those things, you can disprove the Bible. That's how you disprove the Bible. That's how you break it down. That's how you give irrefutable evidence to any Christian out there, whether they take it or leave it. But that is how you do it. Right now, what y'all do is just utterly pathetic. You make claims, you make memes, you take some of history, and you ignore the context of the history. And like, for example, the whole idea that the white man created the Bible. You can say the white man used the Bible. They certainly did. The white man used the Bible to or they use parts of the Bible to manipulate slaves, right? Just like people use certain parts of the law to manipulate the people. But you would never invalidate the entire law because a couple people try to get around the law. Nobody would do that, but you do that with the Bible. You can say they use certain parts of the Bible to manipulate the slaves. They actually did. I will agree with you 100%. But to take that to say, therefore, since they used some of the Bible to manipulate them, all of it must have been created by them to control people. That just ignores all of the history that I just talked about. So we're not going to listen to that. We Christians are not going to listen to that because it's silly. If you really want to disprove the Bible, deal with the historicity of it. Now, and then the other thing about Jesus. The other thing about Jesus is you can take away all of the Christian. You can take away all of the Christian testimony, right? You can take away all of the scriptures, and historically, non-Christian, well-respected historians, they gave accounts of what Christians believed way back in the day, around the time of Jesus and thereafter. They gave accounts of what Christians believed and what they would do. And they say the same thing the scriptures say. The scriptures say that Christ was worshipped as the Son of God and he fulfilled prophecy. And the non-Christians, they say, this is what Christians believe. The Christians, they worship a guy named Christ. They didn't believe in Christ. They thought it was stupid. But they document exactly what happened. Christians would die, but they refused to denounce their silly religion of this Christ. They would be put to death. Or before when they became Roman soldiers, when someone became Roman soldiers, before they went to battle, they would pray to their Christian God. And, it's like, what's the point of that? I'm not saying that they were Christians or they believed in it, but the early testimony of even the non-believers say the same thing that the Christians said about the early belief. So if you want to disprove everything, even if you wipe out if you think you have a good case against the scriptures and church history, what about the non-Christians? What about the non-Christians who despise Christianity or who could care less one way or another? You have to deal with those too. And that is how you disprove the Bible. Not by claims. Dig in there. I gave you a nice long list of things to do. And I want to see somebody try to do that. Not just make claims and post a bunch of memes with twisted or false or inaccurate scriptures, or make claims that the person can't back up. There are so many times I've seen people post memes or make statements, and I'll correct them, and they don't even reply. They just ignore me, and then a week later they're talking to another Christian who may not know any better, and they whip out the same arguments. That is just like, that is despicable. That is despicable. So if you want to disprove the Bible, that is how you do it.